Well, first off, welcome again. It is awesome to have you here, and
I know. I can only imagine. Really.
I mean, I can only imagine what your inbox looks like with regard to requests for your time for speaking and whatever, right? You've made TEDxLiverpool your first TEDx event that you've appeared at live, which is obviously an awesome honor for us. But if your connection, because you haven't been in Liverpool, you moved to LA in about, was it 2001?
Yeah.
Yeah. But you remain very connected, both, I suppose, in all kinds of ways to Liverpool. And I guess really to start with, I just, what kind of keeps you coming back? What connects you so deeply?
It's Liverpool. I'm from here. I was born in Walton, and not far from Everton's football ground, not far from where you are. I thought the story you told about Homebake, that it's a tragedy what's happened in Anfield. And there have been a succession of tragedies, I think, in the way that Liverpool has been planned and abused, I think. But I'm from here. My parents were born here. My family is all here or hereabouts. A lot of them are here today. So don't make any sudden moves. They're trained killers. And so I come back as often as I can. And I went to school in Liverpool for a while. I went to the collegiate. And I used to come to the Everyman all the time when I was at school. We used to have trips here to watch the plays. This has been a fantastic crucible of creativity in British and European theatre, so I just have a great affection for it. And I used to go to a folk club not far from here, at the Seamen's Mission, when I was doing my A-levels. And we used to sit around, there's a group called, a pair called Jackie and Bridie. Do you remember them? And we used to sing sea shanties. I was 18, I think, 17. Do you care how old I was, Herb? Really, it doesn't matter. But I was sitting there with all this gusto. I used to go to the Philharmonic then, and we'd sing these sea shanties where I pledged to give up whiskey and wild women. And I would stop roving. And I hadn't at the time been much further than Widnes, I don't think. But to me, Liverpool's home. I come back. You're right, I do get asked to do a lot of TEDx events. I'm a tremendously popular person, as it turns out. But you can't do all of them, and I just felt it was a great conjunction of timing and energy, and I was just thrilled to be here.
Well, thank you again, of course.
My pleasure.
So, I guess actually, since we talked, we dropped LA into the questions. I'm curious as to what actually catalyzed that leap into the West Coast of America.
Have you been to California?
Yes.
Have you been to Kirkdale? I'm just saying. No. Actually, one of the songs we used to sing at Jackie and Bridie's was sailing to Santiago around the Horn, and they're leaving Liverpool and California. And anyway, there I am. I was asked by the Getty Center in California to do some work with them in 2000 to help them plan their education strategy, and I did that. And a few months later, they called and said, we've got this strategy. We think it's the right thing for us to do. And I said, good. And they asked me if I'd get more involved and said, would you like to come and live in California? I should explain. I was professor of education, arts education, at the University of Warwick at the time. We were living just outside, between Stratford and Coventry. It was the 3rd of January. They said, would you like to come and live in California? We left immediately. I said, as far as I know, the phone's still swinging on the hook. We went, and I think it took the kids about 3 weeks to track us down altogether, but we... No, so they asked me to go out, and seriously, what it's about, I was very interested to listen to Peter Kinsella talk about their journey, he and his wife, that, sometimes people ask you on the right day. You reach a point in your life, something's inside you stirs, and you think, well, I could carry on doing what I do, but I think I'm ready for something else. And we both were, my wife Terry and I, who's from Liverpool too, and we thought this is the right move to make. And some people said to us, aren't you taking a big risk? I was, a tenured professor at Warwick, and we just didn't think it was a risk. We thought it was an adventure. That's what's got Graham to the Philippines, that you do have to take a chance on these things. And I often say, your life is not pre-planned. You create your own life. And you can only make sense of it retrospectively. You come to write your CV, and you try as best you can to make it look like a plan. Because the last thing you want to do is to convey the actual chaos you've been living through all these years. But with luck and a following wind, and with an open heart and an open mind, you can do all kinds of extraordinary things. And this afternoon, I wasn't here this morning, unfortunately, but this afternoon's been full of people who've just done the same thing. There isn't a path. That's part of my argument in life, and why we need to think so hard about education. There isn't a path. You create your path as you take it. It emerges as you try to walk along it. And so for us, the path led to California. Not forever, but just for now.
Now, one thing about LA that I think separates it from other sort of major sort of global capitals as well is that it's obviously so much of the economy around entertainment, and this huge value in creativity and content that I think is very unusual for other places. And I don't know, that must have been a very fertile place for you to have developed your stuff, your research, and your thinking running.
Well, there's a great line from the architect Frank Lloyd Wright, who once said, if you were to turn the world on its side and shake it, everything loose would end up in Los Angeles. And there's a bit of truth in that. But actually, people caricature Los Angeles as being just about Hollywood and the entertainment industry. The Greater Los Angeles has a population of about 12 million people. It's about the size of Greater London. If you take in Los Angeles County, it's over 30 million. It's one of the biggest seaports in America. It faces the Pacific and off to the Pacific Rim. It has huge manufacturing base there. I think it's got the largest Korean population outside of Korea, a huge Armenian population. It's a big, thriving cosmopolitan city of which the entertainment industry is a small but very noisy part. And it would honestly be like reducing the whole of Liverpool to rock music. I mean, rock music being such a big part of Liverpool, but there's so much more to it. So, yeah, it is a cauldron of creativity. But interestingly, very often these places that you expect to be cauldrons of creative in every field struggle with it. So, yeah, I mean, I find that there's a demand anyway of things that we talk about there as much as anywhere else.
Okay, fantastic. So, obviously, it was a few years after moving to LA, that I guess at some point you sort of obviously got onto the TED radar, if you will. And what led up to that 2006 talk, which obviously become such a.
Well, when I got to California, I'd heard about this conference. I mean, I'd spoken to a lot of conferences over the years, and I'd heard about this conference. It had this legendary status. It was happening up in Monterey. As you say, it was expensive, private, made up of the kind of glitterati of Silicon Valley. And they said, you should speak at TED sometime. And I said, well, that'd be nice, but you don't invite yourself to TED. Just hang around outside looking cute, But they did eventually invite me. And at the time, it was a private conference. And the talks didn't go on the internet. They went into a box set of DVDs. They were given to the participants. It was part of the ticket price. And there they sat. And the year I went, there were fantastic people speaking. There were, as you say, the people you mentioned, Al Gore and Tony Robbins. There were people talking about limb regeneration. There were people talking about, like Aubrey de Grey, who was talking about putting an end to aging. He thinks aging is a disease and we should stop it. It's very interesting, actually. It's a very interesting attitude. So all kinds of fascinating people, Hans Rosling, and I thought, well, what can I reasonably do in 15, 18 minutes? And the education and creativity and trying to make the best of people's talents is what's driven me all my life. And I thought, well, I better try and say something about that. And it was a few months later that Chris Anderson, who runs TED, called me and said, we're thinking of putting some of these talks on the website. And would you mind if we included yours? I think there were 5 of them. And I said, well, can I take a look at it? So he sent it to me, and Terry, my wife, and I, we sat and looked at it. I said, what do you think? And she said, it's okay. She said, I wish you'd worn a different shirt. But, because she wasn't there at the time. And so it went online, and it just took off. It just took off. Yeah, we think it's been seen, that first one, it's been viewed online just over 27 million times. So, but it gets shown at events like this all the time. So it's often large audiences. So you probably, if you multiplied it by 10, you wouldn't be far adrift. It might be seen by maybe 300 million people or more. Yeah.
Yeah, well, actually, we've counted it for all your talks, including YouTube and the TED channel. It's well over 40 million views.
50, but who's counting? Who's counting? Come on. Come on. It's 52.3 here, if we're making a point of it. But let's not get pedantic, you know.
So I guess, I mean, one question is, I mean, that's obviously, it's something you didn't plan. I mean, you came to give a talk, you were invited by TED to give a talk, and I'm sure that you went with every intention of giving a great talk. The fact that it took, I guess, a couple of years after your talk, before they even suggested to putting it online, is that right?
A couple of months.
Couple months, right?
Yeah.
All right, is that all? Okay, so there was already kind of, plans were already in train by then.
I just said that, Herb, you know what I'm saying? We just covered that very point. I'm just saying.
Yeah, all right.
No, it was a couple of months.
Yeah.
It was a couple of months. But it took a little while for it to take off. But I'll tell you what it was, honestly. It was the conjunction of several factors. I mean, forget the actual talk itself for a minute. But it happened that they were expanding the website, that YouTube was starting to have an impact. Social media were kicking off. Twitter was starting to get people's attention, and Facebook. So it's like, there was a conjunction of several factors that made it possible. It's like in rock music, they had to wait till they could electrify guitars. There were great guitarists in the 18th century, but you needed certain technologies to make it spread. You needed distribution methods for records and so on. So TED has been a phenomenon, partly because it's inherently interesting, but because the technology has been available to spread this out. I mean, its motif is ideas worth spreading, and we have the technology to do that now.
And I suppose, I mean, how did life change after that? Was it immediately apparent that things were going to be different for you?
No. I mean, it was. It took a while, truthfully. I did an event recently in Michigan. It was a university, and I was speaking to students in the evening. And I mean, what has happened is it's really multiplied interest in these sorts of ideas. So. When I went, they said, well, I'll come and speak to some students. Well, there were, I think, 7,000 of them in the basketball stadium. And anyway, I was having lunch with the faculty beforehand, and one of these guys said to me, he said, you've been at this a long time now, haven't you? I said, what's that? He said, you're trying to transform education. I said, yes, I have. He said, what is it, 8 years now? And I said, how do you mean, 8 years? He said, since that TED Talk. And I said, yes, but I was alive before that. That was... Just, I wasn't invented TED. I mean, I've been banging on about this for years, one way or another. And so what it did do is it created a huge megaphone. And TED will say also, it was one of the reasons that TED itself became so widely distributed. But yeah, I get very gratified, truthfully, by it. I get a lot of kids coming up saying, I've shown this to my parents saying, I've showed it to the teachers saying, I've shown it to my head teacher. And, you can't plan any of that, but it seems to have hit a chord with people, and I'm thrilled about it, because it's what matters to me.
Now, I know that we were talking before about some of your work is involving working with companies, and you mentioned, kind of mentioned Disney. And you mentioned the fact that you were ironically brought in to help the Imagineers re-spark their imagination, I suppose, to some extent, yeah?
Well, I work currently a lot with education systems. I mean, that's my home ground and where I came from. And I still do that. I've worked with entire state systems and national systems here and elsewhere. But I have been asked quite a lot to work with companies on innovation strategies, because the great irony is that our kids, I think, and our teachers are being stifled in schools by this suffocating culture of standardization and utility. It's one thing that's always interested me is that politicians of all parties, and not just in England, often talk about the need to raise academic standards in schools, as if academic is a synonym for intelligence. But actually, the world depends on a multitude of different sorts of talents and possibilities and passions. I mean, look at the stories we heard today, from Peter, and from Tara, from Homebaked, and from Haley. All people who've found an extraordinary passion deep inside themselves, which is in itself a manifestation of deep intelligence. But if you reduce the whole of intelligence to the ability to pass A-levels, or to do low-grade clerical work in primary schools, then don't be surprised if you don't get the best out of people. And it seems to me it's a matter of human rights, apart from everything else, that we're investing our children into the hands of a system that misunderstands them. And the irony is that politicians talk all the time about the need to raise academic standards, and yet academic is a synonym for abstract removal from the real world. You know, the best way to kill any argument is to say, well, it's purely academic, isn't it? You know, academics live in ivory towers, apparently, but now we all want to be like them to save the world. I think it's ridiculous. And I love academic work, you know, but it's just not the way we should measure all forms of ability or intelligence and passion. So, you know, to me, it's a kind of long-standing campaign, and it cuts right at the heart, I think, of what education should be about. But the irony is a lot of these measures, these standardization measures in schools, are being emphasized in what politicians claim to be the interests of the economy. But if you work with companies, they all say we want people to be more creative, more innovative. I mean, all your businesses, I'm sure it's true of Peter's, depend upon people being able to pull on the rope, but with different levels of force and with different levels of talent. And if you keep stamping people out on this uniform, standardized process, you're betraying the very interests you're meant to be serving. So to me, it's a matter of deep significance, and not just personally, it's a global issue now. I think we face such enormous challenges in the world that we can hardly afford to get this wrong, and yet we continue to do it.
Is there anyone that's doing better than others, if you will, at a national level or?
Well, you know, there are great schools everywhere. Great schools everywhere. I mean, I've just recently agreed to become the patron of the Everton Free School, and not because it's free, but because of what it's doing. You know, interestingly, Adrian Packer is here today. Was the kind of spark behind this. It's part of Everton's community program, and they're giving fantastic support to it. But you know, they're building this school in Spellow Lane, which is where I grew up, on waste land, a bit like the land in Anfield, because they knocked these houses down with no good reason. But now there's an empty space there, and they're building a free school based on the principles that I argue for. And this is for kids who are, in many ways, failed by the current system. Now, I don't speak in criticism ever of teachers or of head teachers. It's a systemic problem, and teachers and head teachers suffer as much as the kids do in this system. And to me, it's about radically personalizing education and recognizing that talent is diverse and different, and passions are unique to the people who have them, and that education should be much more like agriculture. It should be about cherishing diversity and creating conditions for growth. And there are many great schools doing that in spite of this rather hostile climate. And what I'd like to see is not doing it in spite of the climate of policy, but because of it. If we put policies in place where people could actually flourish, we'd see a huge difference. And this is true in housing, it's true in the economy, it's true, you see it all across Liverpool. People create conditions of blight and then wonder why people aren't happy with it. And if you create different conditions, as you're trying to do with Home Baked, the whole place comes alive in a different sort of way. You have to believe in that. You have to believe in the vitality of the human spirit. And if you give it room to grow and to flourish, it will far exceed the expectations of policymakers who seem to want to control it.
And why the sort of attachment to, I mean, to quantifying everything, and you know, why, and instead of approaching things differently, to develop things that aren't necessarily going to be measured that easily?
Why do politicians do that?
Yeah, I mean,
well, you know, there are as many as there are politicians, but I think it's partly that politicians have very short lives. You know, they have the half-life of a dragonfly, really, and you know, do you know what I mean? I mean, there are good and bad. The first school I went to in Liverpool, I got polio when I was 4. As part of the epidemic, I thought I should join in. You know, as I was you know, I hated to be left out, and so. But I went to the Margaret Bevan School. It's closed now, but Margaret Bevan in Norris Green. But Margaret Bevan was the first lady mayor of Liverpool. She was a tremendous force for good among the city, and had a particular interest in kids with disabilities. There are brilliant policymakers out there. I don't mean to tar them all with the same brush, but increasingly it's become a profession rather than a vocation. It's people playing to each other in order to further their own advancement up the political ladder, and they have very short attention spans, particularly with the media now. You know, they may have 12 months of innovation, but then they start to try and create data that will persuade people at the next election. It happens in education the whole time. There's an international league table system now called PISA in education, the Program of International Student Assessment, where countries are being ranked through samples of kids at the age of 15. And these league tables come out, and politicians square up to each other against the league tables and flex their biceps and say, look, we're doing well or we're not. You know, PISA has become like the Eurovision Song Contest for education. And we all know what the Eurovision Song Contest has done for the quality of music, you know, in the world. So it's about applying appropriate criteria. I mean, I was fascinated listening to Tara's account of what's up with, you know, what's the matter with antimatter. And I followed almost the entire first two sentences of what you're saying. And it was a brilliant account, I thought, of what you're dealing with. But I'm sure Tara would be, you know, as a brilliant scientist, would be the first to say that science itself is not driven by the data. Not only. In the heart of science, there's judgment. You could see the passion in her eyes as she talked about it, which is as strong as anybody else this afternoon talking about the thing that drives them. Science is a highly passionate occupation, a highly passionate calling, which is supported by data. It's not about the data. You need the data, and it's true in education. And the human sciences, like education, it's fine, you need data, but you mustn't become a slave to it. At the end, it's a human process, and you need to engage and interpret it and make sense. And if you lose sight of the fact that education, like this building, like the arts, you know, like the science too at the heart, if you lose sight of the fact they're essentially human processes, that's when you start to make a mistake. And when politicians believe that their role in life is to gain high office rather than to serve the people who elected them, that's when you get into trouble. And I think we're in big trouble with them.
Absolutely. Okay, actually...